Hello, real estate investors and professionals. This is Rod Wilson. You are on with another episode of the Optimized Real Estate Podcast. Today, I'm on with Shane Lex. Shane is a 17-year veteran in hard money. And a couple things that we cover, we go through his background and some of the things he's been through as far as, various markets and kind of how the industry has changed related to hard money. But more than that, he shares also some of the strategies for getting the best pricing. He covers, some of the top reasons for delays in the process. And then we actually do get into the actual process and how it kind of goes from start to finish. And, I've been a borrower for many years and many loans and many different lenders. And I've also been on the hard money side. And there's a lot in this that I didn't know. So it's a really enlightening podcast, hopefully for you, as definitely was for me. And that's it. Hope you enjoy it, and we will see you on the other side.
Hey, everybody. I'm on with Shane Lex of Anchor Loans. How's it going, Shane?
Doing well, Rod. Appreciate it for having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining. Thanks for jumping on. And Shane, for those of you who don't know Shane, he's been around a while in the private lending space or hard money space, depending on what you want to call it. And I think, Shane, you're probably the OG in hard money because you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, recently just celebrated my 17th year at Anchor.
That's awesome. I love it. And not that we'll get into it on this podcast. You've gone through some interesting transitions with the companies. So it's kind of cool how we morphed back in the financial crisis era. And then
there's been quite a bit of ups and downs since I started back in early 2006.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, let's just jump into it. I guess maybe start with giving us a little bit about your background, kind of what got you into lending and just what you've been working on over the years.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So, I always had a passion for real estate. Got my degree in real estate finance and, knew I was going to get into the real estate investment world. But I also had a passion for flying. And I went through several years of flight training, civilian trained became a flight instructor, instructing out of John Wayne Airport. And so my initial goal in life was to be a professional pilot and then just do real estate on the side. September 11th happened, and this is early on in my training days for being a flight instructor. And it was a very difficult time. A lot of salaries got cut. And throughout those years, going up until about 2004, 2005, I got engaged, and just seeing where that negative trend of where the airline industry was going, I had to make more of a financial decision on, what do I really want to do? And I came across an opportunity to hire with Anchor Loans, who was, only been in business for, at that time, less than 10 years, primarily lending out of South Central Los Angeles. And I was actually teaching one of the ex-partners of Anchor, his wife, how to fly, and they had an inspection position that came up. And it was very intriguing going on their website and seeing what Anchor did. Didn't really understand it, but I knew it involved real estate, it involved financing. So I elected to make the decision to go for an interview. And the rest is history from there. I switched gears. At the time I was, engaged, decided to do full-time real estate instead of full-time flying. And so in early 2006 is when I started. I started on with the company as essentially evaluator and inspector. So because Anchor at that time was lending primarily to real estate investors that were buying at the LA County trustee sale, a lot of the properties we were lending on were in South Central Los Angeles. So those first, 10 years of Anchor, a major goal to, try to help rehabilitate South Central Los Angeles. So I was driving around through South Central, inspecting all the properties. That's where I really learned, the backbone of the business, evaluating properties, driving comparables, talking to real estate agents, doing draws for rehabs, formulating budgets on renovations. But unfortunately at the time, starting in early 2006, we know what happened shortly thereafter.
Right.
Which the co-founders of Anchor were, they're very savvy ex-poker player individuals, and they felt something was wrong in the market. And so they cut originations back by about 50%. And due to some regulations in the state of Texas at that time wasn't as many. The leverage was actually lower in Texas on, when everyone at that time was getting high leverage loans, were getting loans just by, signing their name, all stated income type of verification, which obviously we know led to the crash. But in Texas, because there were some more limitations out there, we thought it was safer to get money in Texas. So in late 2006, I moved out to Texas to start that operation out there since we were cutting back lending in California and we wanted to get money out in Texas. We opened up a satellite shop out there and started lending in Texas. And then between 2007, 2008, we got some money out there, but then we saw an opportunity to come back to California in late 2008, 2009, because, we still had a lot of relationships with real estate investors and developers. And one of them, which is a second or third generation auction buyer at LA County, they had the operation in place to buy the trustee sale, which they've been doing for decades. But during this time, there were back then like 3,000 properties scheduled a day that were going through the foreclosure auction. And, we saw this as a big opportunity because that operation was in place already, but they needed the financial backing, which we had. So essentially we partnered with them. We came in to help support financially, but also down there at the war room every day, bidding on the properties and acquiring them. And it was a really exciting time because between late 2008 to about 2014, we had established an ancillary company called Anchor Homes, which we had bought and sold, basically flipped over 1,500 homes ourselves, buying through the LA County auction. So that's what brought me back to California. And it was, a really great setup having that product from the auction, because not only did it enable us to develop a construction department that we needed to renovate the properties. It's always great for a lender to have a construction department because of REO assets that they'll get back, because then it gives them the option to be able to renovate and sell versus just having to sell the property as is. So that's right. A big benefit, but it enabled us to really capture a lot of new clients because we were able to bring houses that we purchased from the auction. Some we would do and some we would pitch to our investors and provide Anchor's financing, because we knew at that time looking to aggressively lend again as we saw the opportunities. So, but enabled us to get in the flipping business ourselves as well as continue lending. So through that period, we, like I said, we flipped a bunch of houses and we were lending to, our client base was continuing to grow. And then we saw the opportunity where, we could take this nationwide, because we were primarily through all those years from 1998, from when the company was incepted to about, 2014, primarily Southern California based as far as lending. And we saw the capability of being able to scale this nationwide. And so at that time, we were a bit limited on capital to be able to scale nationally. So we put up Anchor for sale in order to obtain a buyer that could inject a lot of funding for us to be able to grow. And so we ended up selling to Wafra Capital, which was a hedge fund out of New York, in 2015. And so before that, because we were limited to about 40 to 50 million in originations per month, and once Wafra acquired us, it gave us the ability to grow very quickly. And within probably 2 years' time, we were doing over 100 million a month in originations. And within a couple of years' time, we grew from just originating in California all throughout, 48 states. Right. So the growth happened really fast. And, it was just really exciting times to see Anchor be able to grow nationally and really try to develop that presence across the country.
Yeah, what an amazing ramp. I didn't realize that it wasn't really that gradual. And then you had the 2008 financial crisis kind of in the middle. But yeah, it sounds like from 2015, things just really kind of went up and to the right.
Absolutely. And there at the same time, though, there were a lot of new originators coming into the space as well, and a lot of money flowing into the space, which, as we saw during that time, all the way up into like 2020 before COVID hit, there was a lot of compression rates and points. 2012 to 2014, we were getting all day long at 12% and 3 points.
Right.
And then got all the way down. Next thing you know, in 2019, we were originating loans at 7% and half a point. And that had to do with just a lot of the money that was in the space and the competition that came, and we had to maintain competitiveness as best as we could.
Right. No, it's kind of nice to see that some of the things that we thought were going to happen are happening, in that some of these guys that have been overly aggressive on leverage or pricing or both are having some challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of similar to what happened last Great Recession. At that time, I remember when originators were going up to like 80% of ARV, 100% financing. And, those were the ones that really got in trouble and had to shut their doors down when the Great Recession came and 30 to 60% corrections in the market. It was a really tough time for them. And, that's where I think Anchor has done really well too, is although we've been able to stay very competitive, we didn't overdo it and get too aggressive in the leverage and the pricing to compete, because we were one of the very few lenders that A, went through the Great Recession, and B, was able to maintain their doors open.
Exactly.
There. So when you had a lot of these other originators that started popping up after the Great Recession, they didn't go through all the troubles that we had to go through. And then next thing you know, you're hearing all this 100% financing they're doing now, potentially in a world of hurt when the market really starts to shift.
Well, thanks for all that. That's actually a lot of that I didn't know. That's some good history for me. And coming from the investor side of it, you hear 100% financing or, really high leverage or really low pricing. And now being, on the lender side, it's like, I get it. Everyone wants the best pricing, best leverage they can get. But at the same point, it's like, and I have to, and I'm sure you do the same, have to basically preach to people that you got to protect the company. You want us to be around to continue to lend to you. There's certain restrictions or whatever. There's certain, guidelines we got to stay within to be a healthy company. And so that's kind of the goal. It's not that we're trying to gouge or anything. And like you said, I mean, we've been very competitive, which has been good for me in kind of getting started in this business.
Right.
Let's switch gears then. Kind of curious. I was thinking about how to ask you this because you've got so much experience in dealing with, obviously we deal with experienced, investors. Bread and butter is kind of fix and flip and ground up construction. I would say not the highly experienced guy that's doing, hundreds a year, but let's just say the kind of the newer, they've got a handful, 5 or 10 deals under their belt, up to kind of that intermediate type investor. What would be your advice on when they're coming to use, hard money? And if they're, they're new to Anchor, what are the things that you think are important for them to focus on when putting together a good package to get kind of the best leverage and pricing with us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's been quite a bit of an evolution within this space as far as lenders are concerned, just as far as like how we used to structure loans versus today. But hard money or private money, however, which term you want to use, a lot of it is about leverage, right? If you're paying cash for all your deals, there's only going to be a certain amount of deals that you're going to be able to do. Versus if you use a company like us and you're able to get a high percentage of the purchase price funded, high percentage of the rehab funds funded, it's going to enable you to do many more deals. It's going to cost more than if you just pay cash for your properties. But at the end of the day, if you do the numbers, you're going to end up making more when you're leveraging, being able to do 20 houses that year instead of just 3. So, when it comes to, a lot of lenders now, they structure based on the cost of the deal, the purchase price and the rehab amount. And most of them are going to require some skin in the game. There are lenders out there, like we just discussed, that are providing 100% financing, but you're definitely going to pay for that. The rates are going to be higher, the costs are going to be higher, the points are going to be higher, the fees are going to be higher, kind of evolved over time. And so there are options out there, but as an investor, when you're searching around for a lender, a couple of things you want to keep in mind is, how long has this lender been around? Because like we said, there's a lot of lenders that popped up recently, and it's really important to understand their capital structure. If you're dealing with a lender that is heavily reliant on the secondary market, and we've went through these cycles very recently, when COVID hit and the secondary markets just froze, as well as around April, May of 2022, when the bond market started going crazy, all the same thing happened where that secondary market, changed dramatically. And so what happens is when you're dealing with a lender or an originator that is relying on selling their loans to that secondary market, it can be held hostage when they've originated these loans thinking that secondary buyer is going to buy these loans because they originated within this box. And all of a sudden their box changes, and now that originator can't sell the loans to them, and they're stuck with these. The great thing about Anchor is we sell our loans internally. It's an internal sale. It's not an external sale.
Mm-hmm.
If there's going to be any changes in our internal box, I call it, we're going to know about it well in advance. And we're going to give enough time to alert our clients of that. Whereas the other originators that are relying on the secondary market, it's very possible that you can get to the closing table. Next thing you know, they just can't fund it. So that's really important to know and understand when it comes to dealing with lenders in this space is how is their capital structured. And, so the longevity of the lender, how their capital structured, and also, asking around people in the space, if you're in the space and you're operating, you should be networking. You should be out there and talking to other investors. And nothing's better than, as an originator myself, getting a lead from a referral. And, it says a lot about a company. And so you definitely want to do your homework on anyone that you're doing business with, whether it's a lender, whether it's a real estate agent, whether it's a contractor, whether it's a third-party lender service provider. You need to really do your homework and ask others that have worked with them before and how their experience was. This space, as far as lenders are concerned and investors and developers, it's not also too just about the leverage, but it's about the experience, the speed, the customer service. Because if you're working with the right lender, it's really going to enable you to focus on the growth of your business, because you're not going to have to worry about where the money's coming from, right? That's really what you're looking for into a lender that operates in a whole variety of different asset classes, different types of programs. They do fix and flip and new construction and rental loans. And because that good lending partner is basically enabling you to focus on your operation and let you focus on what you do best and not have to worry about where the money's coming from. And that's really going to help you scale. Because if you're too involved in the, day-to-day management of just the processing of the loans, that's going to make it difficult for you to scale as an investor or a developer that's in this space. So, speed, flexibility, access to the money, all that's really important when it comes to choosing your lender.
Yeah, no, I think you flipped homes yourself too. A lot of us have been there before where we talk about leverage and pricing so much. In fact, I did a post a while back, maybe even like a year ago, that I was talking about how a lot of investors are just focused on the wrong thing. If you're solely focused on pricing and leverage, I guess there's an argument where, how savvy are you at this business? Because those aren't the only factors. Because I've experienced where, if it takes 2 weeks to get a draw, those are 2 weeks where you're either coming out of pocket or sitting on your hands. And both scenarios are not pleasant on getting a project done. So there's, the experience, the speed, and it was good to hear you talk about some of the history with Anchor, because I think that does set us apart, doing this business ourselves, being an actual fix and flipper, building homes and going through that process and just seeing what, all the little things that can affect a project, and having direct experience in doing that, I think is why I think we're one of the better ones in fund control and just how quickly we move. And I guess there are somewhat intangibles that a lot of investors don't think about.
Absolutely. And, you bring up a good point about the draws, because, it's a very important part of, as far as leverage and the ability to get the project completed. And, investors should realize that from a lender standpoint, a good lender, a smart lender, does not want the draws to be slowed down, right? The quicker that those project gets finished, the better our LTVs get. Right. So we're fully on board of wanting to get those, draws released and projects completed as soon as possible. And so as an investor, when you're potentially talking with a lender, it's a good idea to see if you can talk to one of their draws managers, the manager that oversees the draws, and talk about the process and ways that you can help streamline the process. Right. Like, for instance, Anchor partnered with TruePick, which allows investors to essentially get a link emailed to their phone, which they can download. And since they could be on site at the property, they can take the pictures themselves, which will get automatically uploaded into our platform in order to release that draw. So that way you don't have to wait for scheduling to get a third-party inspector scheduled to go out and do the draws for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's little things like that. And just that simple question of, hey, how can we work best to really streamline this draw process, and talking with them directly before you even do your first deal with them.
Right. So what would you say, what are some of the top mistakes that you see guys making that really kind of impact either whether it's the financing or just the speed of their project?
Well, I would say that probably the number one thing is, even though, leverage can really help someone scale in this business, you also have to be cautious about that, right? And taking on too much debt, taking on too many projects. Because if you grow from, let's say you're used to doing 1 to 2 deals every 6 months, and next thing you know, you're trying to buy 5 houses a month, you can get overwhelmed in both operations and debt very quickly. And so, that's something to really pay close attention to, because you don't want to go from 0 to 100 in 6 months. Especially if you're just starting out, you're going to make mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. You're not going to go through this with everything being perfect. And so, you kind of, like they say, take your baby steps through this process and really want to maintain a what I call manageable growth, because I would say that that's probably the number one thing I've seen as far as investors getting in trouble is they just took on too many projects and too much debt.
Biting off too much and then just not getting through them.
Yeah.
Which I'm always amazed, for some guys, how how slow some of their projects go. And it's like, man. And, I think the market, from whatever you want to call it, probably 2014, 15, 16, and that following 5 to 7 years, I mean, the market bailed a lot of guys out. And now it's the opposite. It's like the longer you take, that cost of capital is going to kill you, especially if the values are pulling back a bit versus, going up and to the right, which is what they were doing for so long.
Right. Well, and that's another reason why you got to really think about, you got to stay on top of the market and what's happening. And you also got to be thinking about, the types of projects you're getting into and the expected length of time, right? Because the longer the anticipated hold time of a project, you're more subject to, market timing risk and adjustments in the market. If you're doing deals, you're going to have much less risk as far as, market adjustments if you're doing deals that you're in and out of in 3 months versus in and out of in 2 or 3 years.
100%.
When you're seeing that, a shift, getting in those long-term deals, as far as large development projects that are going to take 2 or 3 years to finish, that's another area. I mean, that's where we got hurt too on the lending side in 2008, when we were lending on 3 to 6 month term fix and flips. We also got into the development space where we're lending on land deals where it was 2-year developments, and those 2-year development deals as a lender were the projects we got hurt the most.
Yeah.
And so, that's just another aspect that you have to be cautious about is not only can you go from 0 to 100 on the number of deals you're doing, but you can also be impacted if you're going from 0 to 100 on the size of deals you're doing. The higher the price points, typically the longer they take to sell, the longer it takes to do the renovation projects because the budgets are larger. And so I've seen that, like you were talking about, getting over leveraged, and now you're holding a bunch of assets on your balance sheet where you got very heavy rehabs, and it's taking you 18, 24 months to finish the projects. And let's say you're running your performance at 9 to 12 months, that can really impact your bottom line.
Right. I'm curious your perspective on what are the top delays, that you see borrowers either, if it's a matter of not providing documentation or not, kind of teeing the loan up correctly, or what do you see? What causes most delays? And the reason I'm asking is I'm always conscious of, obviously close of escrow, right? We've got, they got their close of escrow, and then sometimes it'll be like, oh, we got plenty of times. We got a couple weeks, and they're a borrower we've worked with in the past. And then, there's like these things will come up in the process that are kind of either surprises, or they're just, I guess, not providing what we need when we need it. And, a day or two doesn't seem like much, but you add you compound that a few times, and here we are, we're not able to close, and then people are freaking out. So I'm just curious with all your years of experience.
Yeah. Well, I strongly believe that that's a very easy fix. From a investor's standpoint, working with a lender, because it's really easy for a lender to provide a full list of items that are going to need through the entire processing. So if you ask for that up front, there shouldn't be any surprises. And even though, you can be sensitive as an investor to, how many documents you're providing, what the lender is asking for. Personally myself, I've been through a lot of, I've obtained a lot of loans throughout my career. And that's one thing I've never really understood, because it's like, for me, and maybe it's just me being in the space, but when a lender asks for something, we'll get it to them in a minute. And that's one of the biggest delays I see, because what investors are never going to really know the ins and outs of a lender's process. And so if the lender's asking for something and, it takes you 7 days to get it to them, you have to realize that that entire 7 days, that file may have just been sitting there. Let's say you got a 6-step process that a lender has, and in order for them to move it from step 2 to 3, they need this item. And you're thinking that, oh, well, it's not that important, I'll get it to you when I get it to you. That file might just be sitting there for 7 days.
Right.
It won't be that long to get it. But, you can even ask the lender to, like, specifically, okay, tell me the steps of the process and, what items you're going to need in order to get to each, right? And then you're not going to get shocked by, the items that a lender's, because you're going to know about it ahead of time.
That's actually a good point. The perception is a lot of times, well, I gave you half of the documents. Can't you just kind of move the file forward half the way forward, and it just doesn't work like that. In fact, as you're saying that, I'm thinking no lender should do that. The ones that do are just inefficient, because you want a complete file. You want to streamline it through the system. And you know how it is, just like our own jobs, when we're working each day, to start and stop and start and stop, it's just so inefficient. So,
well, that's why, like for me and my team at Anchor, I require, whenever we onboard a new client, I require for us to have a video call, just like we're having with my team lead, their assigned loan account coordinator, myself, and the client. So that way, number one, we can meet each other so we all know who we're talking to, as well as the main focus of that call is just to go over our process for them to understand. That is the number one thing that I always experience when I go off to trade shows, conventions, whatever it is. When someone comes up to our booth, comes up to me and asks about Anchor, their first question usually is, hey, what is your process? I think that is one of the least understood as far as investors are concerned. Is like they're kind of going through their first deal with the lender blinded and not really understanding the process. And they get to the finish line and you ask them how the experience was, and they say, yeah, I just wish I would have understood the process. I didn't know you guys had a credit committee. I didn't know that you needed to have all the title docs before you even send the file to underwriting.
Do you want to rip through the process, maybe an abbreviated?
Yeah.
You just reminded me, I've actually wanted to kind of go through this. I know I've listened to some of your calls, and this is a new practice for me as far as doing this with every borrower. But yeah, if you don't mind, maybe just kind of step through it.
Yeah. So, with us, there's 2 ways to go about it. As far as if you're a new client and you're getting onboarded, you can get the application in up front, submit your entity docs and like your bank statements, get all that reviewed and approved up front before you even submit the deal. That will definitely always speed up the process on your first loan. Because most of the lenders, it's like, you apply once, like with us, you only have to complete the application once. We have to run a credit report once a year. And we have to review the entity docs and get those approved. So I highly recommend doing that up front before submitting the deal, but it's not technically a requirement. I mean, you could submit your deal and then because as far as our process is concerned, the first thing we always do when a loan is actually submitted is we do our own internal evaluation. And, so we don't need to have an appraisal completed, reviewed, and approved in order to fund an Anchor loan. We actually can fund deals based on our own internal evaluation. And that's what enables us to close deals in 7 to 10 days. We don't have to wait for an appraisal to come back. There are a lot of originators, and that's something very important to understand too. If you're shopping around for lenders, ask them if an appraisal is required, because if they do require an appraisal, it's going to take minimum 3 to 4 weeks to close a deal, because that's just how long appraisals take. And then not only that, you're going through the entire process, and you don't know for sure until that appraisal comes back if your loan amount's going to remain the same. If that appraisal comes back low, then next thing you know, 2 days before closing, that appraisal comes in. Now they're adjusting your loan amount, which is going to cause you to have more money out of pocket. It's just not an ideal situation. So that's why we do our internal evaluation. And that way, usually within 1 to 3 business days, because that's how long it generally takes our internal evaluations team to come up with value to essentially determine your final loan amount.
Mm-hmm.
So very simple documents we need in order to get the valuation completed. And then once we get that value in, we send you a final loan estimate in order for you to review and approve as the investor. And once you give us the green light, that's now when we start packaging the deal to go for full approval to the credit committee. It's important too to understand a lender has, a credit committee or some sort of approval committee, because that is one part of the process that can slow things down. But if you know about it up front, then you're expecting that. And that's one thing that I think is big in this business, is just setting the right expectations. And so once the file gets packaged together and submitted to the credit committee, at that point, they're just, usually like with us, only your first couple of files need to be reviewed by the credit committee. And at that point, they're just making sure that, you're within the terms we're providing, leverages look good, experience, credit. And then when they're approving it, they're also approving basically your blanket terms going forward. Once it gets through credit committee, then they're just packaging it together, the documents together to get in line for docs. So essentially the beginning, the end as a new investor, get your application in and your credit run, entity docs review, bank statements in, boom, that's out of the way. Now we start the evaluation. Evaluation gets done, you review the final loan estimate, you approve it, goes to credit committee, gets approved, your blanket terms get approved, and then you're getting in line for loan docs. So it could be that simple. The whole process for us, we shoot for a new borrower to be completed with all that within 10 business days.
And then, so I'll just add a couple little points in here. So the valuation is going to be, is obviously a key part of it. And that'll require the purchase contract, the itemized budget, bed bath count, square footage, are you adding? And then also kind of the overall game plan. You're buying, you're adding value, you're adding square footage, you're going to put renters in there, and then you're going to go get perm financing, or you're going to, sell it when it's done, whatever the game plan is, we need to know.
Yeah.
We need to know all that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another key point that investors need to realize and understand, is that you want to get the highest value possible. And so the more information that you provide them, the better, right? I mean, there's often that we get deals submitted where they just give a property address and no other information, right?
Right.
And then we come back with the value and they're like, well, your value's way off. And we're like, well, we see that, you have, based on the tax records, it's a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath. And they're like, but adding 300 square feet, and at the end, it's going to be a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. Well, it's like that information would have been great to know up front, right?
Right.
So very critical to make sure they know what you're doing with that property.
Yep.
And the detail, even if you want to get into the details of the renovations that you've been doing, the type of finishes you're putting in, that can all help with value.
That's actually two huge nuggets right there. One is kind of what your game plan is on the property. And, I try to pull this out of people, and some are better than others. And then some are very forthright as far as like, well, here's my last 5 projects and here's our finishes, and they're much higher end than anything else in the neighborhood, and blah, blah, blah. And this is why we've set records. So all that, you don't, I guess when I was, developing, maybe I didn't put enough value on that, but it's huge, because that's what, underwriters want to see. It's like, this is a fairly low risk loan, low risk investment, because this guy is super professional.
I mean, one point I bring up is, put yourself in the evaluator's shoes, right? And let's just say you get a property address and you're like, someone's going to put $50,000 into this. What is it worth, right? And that could be very subjective, right? Well, what kind of finishes are they putting in there with that 50,000? What exactly are they doing with that 50,000, right? Does that involve full landscape package? And, if you have your past projects, and if you submit a deal and you tell them, and you include pictures of a renovation that you've recently done, that's going to look just like this new deal that you got, so that evaluator can actually visualize that end product, can be very helpful.
I just did this. We had a valuations call, and they showed one of their past projects and got into the finishes, because it's in pretty high end neighborhood, and those buyers they appreciate the nicer finishes and they'll pay for it. And so we were able to get a little bit higher value. But yeah, the more we could have up front, the better. The other nugget I thought was in getting the best pricing. A big thing and actually it becomes challenging in some cases, is just experience. And I talk about to borrowers, like telling your story. You were a real estate agent, out of high school, and you're building homes for 10 years, and now you're developing. I mean, that's quite a bit different than just the guy who just started, developing, last week. And that's what our underwriters want to hear. So it's like telling your whole story, not only the story of the project, but also just yourself and your experience and background is key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we'll take all that into consideration if we know about it.
Right.
That's the key thing, that we know about it. And, as far as, experience is concerned, it's a big thing when it comes to lenders and mitigating risk. They feel like the more experience you have, the less likely they're going to take properties back. And I would just add that, that's another critical part on your lender selections, because what ends up happening is, if you're going from one lender to another lender to another lender, it's going to make it difficult to really build that relationship. And because most lenders, they're going to appreciate that if you're showing that performance and that loyalty with that one lender, that's where you're going to be able to really get your discounts, right? As far as pricing and exceptions being made. So, sticking with one lender, and not only that, streamlining the process, right? If you're going from one lender to another lender, every lender's processes are different.
Right.
So if you stick with one lender and you already know that process, they already know you, that can really help on the timelines too.
Absolutely. No, you don't want to keep starting over. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks, Shane. That was all great stuff. I appreciate you jumping on. And
yeah, I had a great time, Rod.
I learned a lot more about Anchor. Thanks.